Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It helps YouTube recommend more of my videos to you. Now let's begin. My name is Lena Harrow, and I've lived in the small town of Blackwater my entire life. It's the kind of place most people would drive through without even noticing. Neat lawns, an old church, a single diner, and a river that runs through the middle like a silver vein. From the outside, everything looks peaceful, ordinary. But a few months ago, I discovered something about this town that made me question everything I thought I knew. About my neighbors, my family, even about what we've built our lives around. Blackwater is different. When other towns around us were drying up, crops failing, wells empty, jobs gone, we kept thriving. Our river never ran dry. Our fields stayed green. People said it was because of Hemlock Water, the local bottling plant that kept everyone employed and kept the town's economy alive. But there's something about the river that people here don't talk about. When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me, "On the first full moon of autumn, you stay inside after dark. Promise me, Lena." I used to think it was just one of those old small-town superstitions, like not whistling after midnight or throwing salt over your shoulder. But the older I got, the more I realized it wasn't fear that kept people away from the river on those nights. It was respect, or maybe guilt. I work at the Blackwater Public Library, which sounds fancier than it is. It's just 2 rooms in an old brick building next to the post office. Most days it's quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the clock ticking and the pipes humming under the floor. A few months ago, I decided to start a small local history project for the library's website. Mostly, I just wanted to organize old records, birth certificates, news clippings, town council minutes. But once I started digging, I found something strange. It began with a series of accidents, all involving the river. The first mention was from 1900. Local man found drowned near Old Mill, tragic mishap during storm. Then 1925. Teenager found in shallows after festival. 1950, 1975, 2000. Every 25 years exactly. Always around the first full moon of autumn. Always listed as a drowning. The victims were different. A drifter, a factory worker, a teenage girl, a hiker. But the pattern was too precise to ignore. Someone in the past had noticed too. I found pencil marks in the margins connecting dates, underlining names. The writing stopped after 2000. That's when I realized the next accident was due this year. When I asked our police chief, Mr. Corbin, about the drownings, he just smiled and said, "The river's unpredictable, Lena. Best not to read too much into old stories," but I could tell by his eyes, tired, avoiding mine, that he knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the river through my open window, steady and calm, as if it was breathing. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what it sounded like when someone was dragged under. As autumn crept closer, I began to notice the shift. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The town changed. Shopkeepers started closing earlier. The cheerful chatter in the diner turned into whispers. Parents reminded their kids to be home before dark, their voices sharper than usual. Even the church bells, usually ringing every Sunday morning, went silent one week without explanation. It wasn't just superstition, it was preparation. Down by the river, I saw workers from Hemlock Water moving heavy equipment late into the night. No lights, no noise, just the dull rumble of engines and the faint reflection of flashlights on the water. When I tried to ask one of them what they were doing, he froze for a second, then muttered, "Just maintenance, ma'am," before hurrying away. And then there was Old Man Hemlock himself, the owner of the plant, the man everyone in town owed their livelihoods to. He hadn't been seen in public for years, but one afternoon he appeared at the community hall. Frail, hunched, but his eyes sharp, like he saw through people. He gave a short speech about gratitude and tradition, thanking the townsfolk for their loyalty. When he said, "Some blessings come with responsibility," I swear the room went still. Everyone nodded, even the mayor, even the priest, and for a few seconds I felt like I was the only person who didn't understand what was really being said. The days leading up to the first full moon of autumn were tense. People bought groceries in bulk, boarded up certain windows, and avoided small talk. It was like the whole town was holding its breath. That evening, I overheard my parents arguing. My father said quietly, "She doesn't need to know." "Not yet," my mother replied. "It's not our choice." Everyone has to play their part, their part. That phrase echoed in my mind long after they went silent. By the time the Harvest Festival banners went up, I knew the truth. Whatever was about to happen, everyone was involved. Everyone. Except me. The night before the festival, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd read in those records. There had to be more, something the town had deliberately hidden. So after work, I returned to the library. Everyone else was busy setting up decorations at the town square. The streets were nearly empty and the air felt thick and heavy, like the sky itself was warning me not to go. I went straight to the archive room, the oldest part of the building where the floors sagged and the lights flickered. I searched through the lower drawers until I found a file marked Flood of 1900 Restricted. Inside were brittle pages, typewritten reports, and one handwritten letter that stopped me cold. It was signed by Jonathan Hemlock, the founder of the mill. The letter described how, in 1900, after weeks of relentless rain, the river flooded and nearly destroyed the town. Crops, homes, livestock, everything gone overnight. Hemlock's mill was the only structure left standing. The letter said he went to the riverbank that night to beg for mercy. But instead of praying, he made a promise. He offered the river a life for the town's life. That same night, his younger brother Samuel disappeared. The flood receded the next morning. From then on, Blackwater thrived while every neighboring town struggled. The letter ended with one final line written in shaky ink. "Every quarter century, the debt must be renewed." The water remembers I felt sick. My hands were trembling as I packed the documents back. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't superstition. It was a bargain, a trade that had kept the town alive for generations. And as I locked the archive door behind me, I realized something worse. This year marked exactly 125 years since the first offering. The debt was due again. The Harvest Festival was supposed to be a celebration. Food stalls, games, laughter echoing through the town square, but that year it felt different. Forced, hollow, like everyone was performing happiness instead of feeling it. Bright lanterns hung from every tree and music played from the bandstand, but no one looked toward the river. Not once. From my house on the hill, I could see it all. The festival lights glowing orange and gold on one side of town, and on the other, darkness swallowing the riverbank. Around 9 p.m., I noticed the mayor, the police chief, and 2 of the council members quietly leaving the festival. They didn't take the main road. They slipped away down the old mill path, the one that led to the water. I don't know what possessed me to follow, maybe curiosity, maybe defiance. Or maybe I just needed to see if what I'd read was true. The path was muddy and cold. The deeper I went, the louder the sound of the river became, not rushing but moving like it was alive, whispering beneath its surface. Then I saw them. Half a dozen figures standing by the river's edge, flashlights pointing toward the current. I recognized their silhouettes. The mayor, the police chief, and behind them Old Man Hemlock, barely able to stand but somehow commanding all their attention. A shape was kneeling in front of them. A man, maybe in his 30s. His hands were tied. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I heard his voice. Panicked, begging. "I didn't do anything, please." And after that, there was a splash. A sharp single scream that was cut off too fast, then silence. No one moved for a long time. The men just stood there, staring at the water, waiting. The river rippled once, glowing faintly under the moonlight, and then went still. When they finally turned back toward town, I pressed myself against the trees until they passed. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. It never had been. It was an offering. And everyone, every smiling face at the festival, knew it was happening. By morning, the town was already back to normal. The news spread quickly, so a traveler had fallen into the river sometime during the night. The police called it a tragic accident. The mayor gave a short statement about community safety. And just like that, it was over. No one mentioned the full moon. No one mentioned the men I saw. At the library, people came in smiling again, pretending nothing had happened. The festival decorations were still up. Kids laughed outside. The world looked untouched. A day later, Hemlock Water announced its newest product. Purist Spring Batch Limited Edition. The whole town celebrated the factory's record production. I couldn't stop staring at the bottles. The label showed the same river I'd seen shimmer under the moonlight. The same water that had taken a life. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That slow, rhythmic sound of the river breathing. And when the wind carries it just right, I swear I can hear something beneath it. Voices, pleading. I tried to tell myself I imagined it all, that maybe I misread the records, maybe I misunderstood what I saw. But then I'd see my parents look away whenever the river's mentioned, or watch the police chief's face tighten at the sound of running water. In Blackwater, everyone knew the truth. And now, so do I. Some nights when the moon is full, I still see the glow on the river's surface, a soft, silvery shimmer. That's when I remember my mother's words. On the first full moon of autumn, you stay inside after dark. Now I understand why. My name is Daniel Evans, and 3 years ago I took a teaching job in a quiet little town called Oakhaven. The kind of place where time feels a little slower, where everyone knows everyone else, and secrets tend to stay buried under polite smiles. I was the new 4th grade teacher at Oakhaven Elementary, and at first I thought it was the fresh start I needed after leaving the city behind. The school was old, older than it looked from the outside. Long hallways with flickering fluorescent lights, scuffed floors polished to a dull shine, and that faint, musty smell of paper and dust that never quite went away. Still, it had charm, a sort of small-town warmth that made me feel welcome, at least in the beginning. It didn't take long before I started noticing strange little things. The drawings my students made, the way they talked about the lady in the hallway, and how every adult in the building seemed to go quiet whenever I mentioned her. At first, I thought it was just a local ghost story, something the kids whispered about for fun. But I was wrong, because every one of them had seen her. And eventually, so did I. It started with the drawings. I had given my class a simple assignment: draw a character from your imagination. I expected the usual castles, superheroes, and talking animals. What I didn't expect was for nearly every student, independently, to draw the same figure. Tall, long blue dress, no face. At first I assumed it was coincidence. I asked, "Who is she?" "She's the hallway lady," one of the twins, Sarah, said casually without looking up from her work. "The hallway lady?" I repeated. "She stands at the end of the hall," her brother Sam explained. "She watches, but she doesn't move much." I laughed nervously. Shared imagination, perhaps, I thought. But as the week went on, more children mentioned her. Some said she whispered their names, others swore they had seen her outside the gym at night, pale and still, as if frozen in place. One afternoon, while collecting papers, I thought I saw a shadow in the far hallway. Tall, thin, unmoving. I blinked, and it was gone. The chill that ran down my spine made me pause longer than usual in that corridor. Even stranger, the students never seemed afraid. They spoke about her with the casual acceptance of someone describing the weather, not a ghost. A faint smell of smoke sometimes lingered near the gym doors. Lights flickered overhead when nobody was nearby. I began to notice the cold drafts, inexplicable and constant, sweeping through the hallways as if someone or something was always moving just out of sight. And slowly I realized the truth. These children were not imagining the hallway lady, they were describing her. Accurately, consistently, and with a clarity that terrified me. It was becoming impossible to ignore. Curiosity turned into concern, and concern quickly became unease. I mentioned the hallway lady casually during a teacher's lounge conversation, thinking it might just be a funny story to share. The moment the words left my mouth, the room went dead silent. The art teacher, Mrs. Whitman, stopped mid-sip of her coffee. The janitor's broom paused in the air. Even the usually chatty lunch coordinator stared at the floor, muttering something incomprehensible. I tried to laugh it off. "It's just the kid's imagination," I said, hoping to ease the tension. But the stares I got weren't from disbelief. They were warnings. Subtle, almost invisible, but unmistakable. Later that day, Principal Mrs. Gable called me into her office. Her tone was firm, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Evans," she said, "I know you're new, and I understand you care about your students, but you must stop encouraging these fantastical stories. Some things are best left alone. A hallway's lady," I asked, my voice catching slightly. She looked away, tight-lipped. "You heard me. Don't bring it up again." For your own good, I left the office feeling like I'd stumbled into a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Then came small, unsettling moments. A door to a maintenance room near the gym was always locked, no matter the time of day. The faint smell of smoke lingered there, even when no one was inside. One afternoon, Sarah whispered to me as I passed the twins' desks. "She used to teach art here. And she's sad," Sam added quietly, "because no one says sorry." Those words clung to me long after the day ended. The adults in this town, the teachers, the principal, the staff, they all knew something. They knew the truth behind the hallway lady, and they had spent decades pretending they didn't. I began to understand the silence wasn't ignorance, it was complicity. Parent-teacher night arrived like any other, with polished floors, nervous chatter, and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. I had prepared my notes, hoping to share student progress and creativity. But as I walked through the gym-turned-meeting room, I noticed the shadows of the hallway lingering at the edges of my vision. I decided to casually mention the students' creative project, the drawings of the hallway lady, as a point about imagination and artistic consistency. When I spoke to Sarah and Sam's parents, their reaction was immediate and intense. Their faces drained of color, their hands tightened around the papers they were holding, knuckles white. "Please," the mother whispered, gripping my arm, her voice barely audible. "Don't. For your own good. Just let it go." I blinked, startled. I'm just talking about the drawings," I stammered. She shook her head rapidly. "No, not just the drawings, not here, not ever." The father said nothing, but I could see the same fear mirrored in his eyes. Something in their expression froze me in place. I had crossed an invisible line, one that teachers in this town were never supposed to cross. Later, when I returned to my classroom, I noticed an old photograph on the wall of the school. A woman in a long blue dress smiled at the camera. her presence warm and graceful, yet somehow out of place. A small caption read, "Eleanor Vance, Art Department, 1989. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Part of her had been here all along, in the hallways, in the children's drawings, in the whispered warnings of the parents. And it was no coincidence that the art wing where she once taught was now the gym. That night, I stayed late after everyone left. The corridors were silent except for the distant hum of the heating system. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to piece together the fragments I'd glimpsed. And slowly the truth began to take shape in my mind. The next few days I buried myself in research, combing through old yearbooks, microfiche, and newspapers at the town library. Every clue seemed to point in one direction. The hallway lady wasn't a figment of imagination. She was Eleanor Vance, the art teacher who had died decades ago under mysterious circumstances. The official report said it was a tragic accident, faulty wiring, an untended candle, an old building. But as I dug deeper, small details began to stand out. A faintly scorched corner of an old photograph, a handwritten note in the margin of a newspaper. It wasn't an accident. I pieced together fragments of town lore. Eleanor had been beloved by her students, known for her patience, her laughter, and her stunning blue dresses. But she had also crossed paths with powerful families in town. Families who didn't tolerate any perceived disrespect or rebellion. Rumor had it that one night a group of boys, children of the town's wealthiest parents, had locked her in the art room as a cruel prank. A candle knocked over set the room ablaze. Eleanor perished in the flames. The school and the town had covered it up to protect the boys. Every adult I had seen go silent, every parent who had turned pale at the mention of the hallway lady, every teacher who avoided my gaze, they were all complicit. They had kept this secret for decades. The children, I realized, were the only ones who truly saw Eleanor. Their innocence allowed them to perceive what the adults buried in shame. The gym, the place where the children now whispered of the hallway lady, was built over the old art wing. The same hallways, the same classrooms, the same walls that had witnessed her final moments, now filled with laughter, fluorescent lights, and the scent of crayons. And yet, through it all, Eleanor's spirit remained silent but watchful, faceless but unmistakable. The adults' guilt had trapped her here, bound to the corridors and to the memories of the children who could see her clearly. I finally understood. This was not a story for books. It was a warning, a memory, a truth no one wanted to acknowledge, yet one that refused to die. After that, I never mentioned the hallway lady again. But I couldn't unsee what I had learned. In the hallways, in the quiet corners of the school, I could feel her presence. A faint chill, the rustle of a dress that shouldn't be moving, a soft, whispered name that made my stomach tighten. Sarah and Sam occasionally drew her in their notebooks. When they did, I noticed a subtle change in the room. The other children grew quiet, and even the custodians or passing teachers would pause mid-step, glance down the hall, and mutter something under their breath before moving on. It was then I realized the truth. In Oakhaven, everyone knew what had really happened to Eleanor Vance. Every parent, every teacher, every official had silently agreed to keep it hidden. To speak her name aloud was to acknowledge a shameful crime that had stained the town for decades, and the children, the ones innocent enough to see the ghost, were the only ones who remembered the truth without fear. Sometimes late at night, when the school is empty and the corridors are silent, I swear I see her. Faceless in a long blue dress, standing at the end of the hallway, waiting, watching. In Oakhaven, we never teach the story of Eleanor Vance, but the children remember. And when they draw her, we all just get very quiet and change the subject. Because some truths are too heavy for the living to bear, even when they are right in front of us. My name is Jake, and I live in a small town called Maplewood. It's the kind of place where streets are quiet, lawns are neat, and nothing ever seems out of place. At least that's what I thought, until you live across from Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson was the perfect neighbor. He mowed his lawn every Saturday, baked pies for holidays, and greeted everyone with a smile so practiced it could have been carved in stone. From the outside, he was the kind of man you'd expect to star in a commercial for small-town charm. But we all knew the truth. 15 years ago, his wife and 2 children moved away suddenly to care for a sick relative out of state. That's what the sheriff, who also happened to be his cousin, told everyone. But the story we whispered among ourselves was different. We knew Mr. Peterson had buried his family under the rose bushes in his backyard. No one ever spoke of it aloud. Not neighbors, not parents, not even the sheriff. But the signs were impossible to ignore. The rose bed behind his house was manicured to perfection. Every weed pulled, every bloom pruned, every branch angled just right. It was like the earth itself remembered what had happened beneath it, and Mr. Peterson tended it with obsessive devotion. We all behaved accordingly. Toys stayed on our lawns. Kids never strayed near his yard. Casseroles were delivered on holidays. Smiles were forced, laughter too loud. There was a silent agreement we never acknowledged, a contract written not in words but in fear and habit. We would pretend he was normal, and he would pretend he was normal. Every time I walked past that house, my stomach tightened. The roses glistened in the sunlight, innocent and perfect. But I knew the horror that lay beneath. 15 years ago, life in our neighborhood changed, though nobody spoke of it openly. Mr. Peterson's wife and 2 children vanished without warning. The story given to the community was simple and tidy. They moved away to care for a sick relative out of state. No one questioned it. The explanation fit the small-town rhythm we all clung to. But the truth was something else entirely, and everyone knew it. Whispers passed in hushed tones between neighbors, rumors that grew stronger with each passing year. Everyone suspected that Mr. Peterson had killed them, a man pushed to rage and despair, and buried them carefully beneath his beloved rose bushes. The evidence, though unspoken, was obvious. His manic devotion to that single rose bed. Not a weed ever grew there. Every bloom was perfectly aligned, every branch shaped with precision. It wasn't care, it was obsession. The sheriff, Sheriff Miller, who also happened to be Mr. Peterson's cousin, investigated the disappearance. Officially, the case was closed, deemed a harmless relocation. Unofficially, the neighborhood knew the truth. Miller's report wasn't an oversight. It was protection. The family's fate was a secret shared by those in power, carefully concealed under the guise of civility and normalcy. I remember standing across the street as a child, staring at the house. Its windows glimmered in the sun. Mr. Peterson would be out front, meticulously trimming the grass, watering the roses, smiling as he waved at passing neighbors. And yet the absence of laughter, the silence of the house, the untouched mail, and it spoke louder than words. The man next door wasn't a ghost, he wasn't even hiding. The horror was in the knowledge that everyone, including my parents, had agreed to let it all slide, to pretend that nothing had happened. Even now, years later, the truth of what was buried in that yard lingered. A quiet terror that hung over every Sunday barbecue, every polite greeting, every forced smile. In our town, Mr. Peterson's house was untouchable. Not because of locks or fences, but because of an unspoken agreement that stretched across the entire neighborhood. Neighbors treated him with a strange, almost exaggerated courtesy. On holidays, casseroles would appear at his doorstep, not out of kindness, but as a reminder that we were all playing the same role. Kids' toys were carefully kept off his lawn, their paths corrected mid-play as though guided by invisible hands. Even casual greetings carried an edge of tension. Smiles too wide, Voices slightly too high, laughter too loud. Everything was designed to convince ourselves that the man next door was normal, harmless, perfect. At the annual neighborhood barbecue, the ritual became even more pronounced. Mr. Peterson would sit at the head of the table, quietly nodding as neighbors made small talk. Everyone else would chatter endlessly, their voices trembling just beneath the surface, glancing at the pristine rose bed behind his house whenever possible. The flowers glistened like jewels in the sunlight, perfectly aligned, hiding the darkness beneath them. My parents were complicit in this performance. They greeted him politely, offered pie, laughed when he told mundane stories about the weather, all while making sure I understood to never ever mention the past. I learned quickly that the neighborhood's safety rested not in law enforcement or locked doors, but in collective denial. Walking past his house became a daily exercise in controlled fear. The more normal everyone acted, the more the truth pressed against the edges of my mind. Everyone knew, everyone understood, and yet no one spoke. It wasn't just Mr. Peterson who was perfect, it was the entire neighborhood bound by silence and fear, preserving a fragile illusion that the horrors in his backyard had never happened. Every day, walking past Mr. Peterson's house felt like passing a monument to quiet horror. His routines were flawless, unnervingly meticulous. Every morning, the mower hummed across the lawn at exactly 7 o'clock. Every afternoon, he watered the roses, bending and twisting each branch with obsessive care. Every evening, he closed the blinds, though no one had ever seen him look inside anyone else's windows. I watched from my bedroom window across the street, trying to convince myself it was just a man who liked order. But the more I observed, the more unnatural it felt. The roses glowed in the sunlight, flawless and vivid, their beauty taunting in its precision. Every time I walked past, my parents reminded me, not out of concern, but to enforce the same silent rule everyone in the neighborhood followed: never acknowledge what lies beneath. Even my friends knew better. Conversations avoided his house entirely. Jokes about him were whispered, carefully screened to ensure adults couldn't overhear. One summer, a ball rolled onto his lawn, and my neighbor's younger brother froze, eyes wide. My father appeared moments later, smiling tightly, and retrieved it, saying, "Let's not tempt fate." That phrase echoed in my mind for years. Sometimes I saw Mr. Peterson's face up close, a fleeting wave, a polite nod, the kind of smile that should have felt warm but instead chilled me to the bone. It wasn't anger and it wasn't malice. It was calm, quiet, the kind of calm that comes from someone who knows no one will ever stop them. The real terror wasn't the man himself. It was the neighborhood. The way the adults, my own parents included, silently enforced the lie. They baked pies, they mowed their lawns, they smiled and nodded and laughed at the exact moments required. They were the guardians of a secret far more horrifying than any ghost story. A collective decision to ignore a truth too terrible to confront. Every day, passing the rose bushes felt like walking past a graveyard, only without tombstones. The earth was perfect, the flowers were perfect, and the silence, that heavy, suffocating silence, was perfect. Because in that cul-de-sac, horror didn't shout. Horror smiled, nodded politely, and waited for you to look away. Years have passed, and Mr. Peterson is still there, tending his roses, waving politely, baking pies. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. The true horror isn't in what he did or even in what lies beneath those perfect blooms. The horror is in the neighborhood, in the adults who walk past the rose bushes every day and pretend everything is normal. My parents, my friends' parents, the sheriff, all complicit in an unspoken agreement that maintains an illusion of civility. I've learned to navigate it carefully. Toys never stray onto his lawn. I wave when he waves. I smile when he smiles. I pretend, as we all do, that the past doesn't exist, and every time I see him I feel that quiet, suffocating dread settle over my chest. The roses glisten in the sun, immaculate, taunting, and beneath them the truth waits, silent and unyielding. It isn't screaming, it isn't moving, it doesn't need to. Its existence is proof enough. Sometimes I catch a glance from neighbors, a subtle look, a twitch of a smile, and I realize they see it too. They all see it. And yet we all keep walking, keep smiling, keep pretending. Because in our cul-de-sac, some truths aren't spoken, they're survived. And sometimes the truth doesn't need to scream to terrify you. Sometimes it only needs to be perfectly silent, perfectly hidden, and perfectly watched. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite one, hit that like button, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.